Hello there, my name is Mack Rapapali. Welcome to your African manufacturing panel discussion brought to you by MCAD-CAM. And as usual, you know Steve du Preez as the guy that always focuses on sustainable growth. And joining us in studio is none other Vusi Thembakwayo and Tatenda Mungofa. I said that name right, right?
That's
Ah,
correct.
man, I am safe. Steve, now you invited the gentleman in studio. What is the core focus today?
So, Mac, I think the core focus of today is actually to discuss the future of African manufacturing. So, as it currently stands, we know that there's quite a lot of challenges in Africa with regards to manufacturing, but we also know that there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think to have this discussion today is just to highlight some of the challenges and to also find plausible solutions. I think we're sitting with some of the brightest minds on the African continent here with us today, and we could surely come up with some sort of plausible solution to overcome these challenges that we're facing, and to look at Africa as a manufacturing hub for a brighter future for all Africans, from South Africa all the way up to Tunisia and Egypt.
All right, so gentlemen, Steve did mention challenges. Could each of you highlight one significant challenge and how it impacts the industry? It's an open floor.
Do alphabetical order, so you go first.
Okay, no, thank you, Steve, Mac, Vusi. I think challenges are broad by definition, but narrowing it down to the manufacturing space, skill set, mindset, and confidence. Because in my space, from a car manufacturing perspective, there's not a lot of confidence, particularly on this continent, because everything we are trying to do is a copy of what is being done elsewhere. Example, China. So you can't necessarily be confident of something you are copying. You know, even in an exam, you are not really confident when you copy someone's answer. You don't know what you're doing. So that translates behind the scenes to skill sets, how you were brought up, the environment that you're in. Do you have the tools? Do you have the equipment? And there's a word that we all call technology. At the very core, technology is not necessarily things that other people don't know. It's what you use to do what you are already doing. You know, spoon is simple technology, you know. So the confidence and competences around what we are trying to do in the manufacturing space, I think they start there. And if you focus on each sector, you find it in different formats. So I'll just anticipate that as we are going forward, the younger generation has got more exposure. You know, TikTok actually teaches people a lot more now compared to maybe formal education, because you grasp ideas in a very short span and you're able to maybe apply some of them. So those are some of the challenges I see from my space. And one other very special one, when I say skill set, this TikTok generation we have might not necessarily be suited for a manufacturing space, because they look at it differently. They are for instant solutions, and yet some of these process-driven functions in a factory require time for you to actually do something, to mold a part, to build a part, to assemble a part. So that challenge, again, is a very serious skills gap that needs to be addressed. So I'll pass it on to Vusi. Maybe he can enlighten us from a different perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Tatenda. By the way, I'm concerned about you copying at exams. I think but we'll take this offline. I think broadly, capital is a significant challenge. And by the way, capital at all stages, right? Whether you're in Tatenda's kind of journey and experience, your early stage, and you're looking for seed capital, or you've got proven MVP, you've got market fit already, you've got traction, you've got revenues. Now you're looking for growth capital. What you'll actually find in South Africa is that South African asset allocators don't back South African innovations, and it's not a South Africanism; it's an Africanism, right? We have this idea that if something is forward-thinking, innovative, cutting edge, it can't come from here. What Tatenda would call it is confidence, right? And it's, in his business, for instance, it might be whether or not his brand gets resonance in the marketplace. It's precisely the inability for us, I think, as Africans to back ourselves, that actually is a huge impediment. And you see it in different ways. You'll see it in the skill set problem. You'll see it in technical competency. You'll see it in availability of product for the supply chain. But in my world, you see it in the ready availability of capital for businesses that require it. And you must remember, manufacturing, similar to mining, for instance, is a capital intensive business, right? You can't architecture it any other way, and you can't scale it any other way. Now you can use technology for efficiencies for sure, but it's a capital intensive business. And so there just is no way to be meaningfully competitive in the global context and achieve the correct amount of volumes to get your marginal pricing right without capital. And as long as capital sits on the sidelines and watches the debate take place, then I think the industry is going to continue to face the same headwinds it's faced over the past 30 years.
Steve? Yeah, so I think Tatenda touched on it, and it is skills. One of the major things is skills. Vusi's point is totally correct, because in mid-Africa, let's say Central Africa, you won't go and find a laser cutting machine or a CNC machine. Companies that invest, their mining companies, they send all their repair work either to South Africa or to West Africa for repair work. So why isn't there a skill set and there to complete that job right there? Firstly, it'll be cost effective. So the mine will save money, or the company would save money from a plant readiness perspective. So now your downtime is less, and you've got people that can do it right there. So Angola and Uganda, there are certain companies that's now seen this gap, and they're moving forward into it. And we've actually done some training for on the SolidWorks side for quite a number of people. But there is still not enough of this happening in Africa. And obviously with the capital not being there, skill set not being there, it's like you don't know what you don't know. You know, artisans there might only be limited to a certain knowledge set. We were talking about going from SACWA to QCTO and qualifications earlier, and that is exactly it. Are we still using a curriculum that's 30 years old? So yes, I can qualify as an engineer, but I'm working on things that's outdated. So technologically, I haven't advanced myself. The curriculum hasn't been adjusted, and that applies down to skill set. And then obviously mindset. You know, we're in Africa, and we degrade ourselves because we're in Africa.
But now, how can then Africa leverage its unique strengths to compete on a global stage?
So firstly, we need to look at what happened in China, what happened in India. So China, the second biggest economy in the world, wasn't the second biggest economy in the world 30 years ago. Not even by close. They weren't even in the top 10. Okay, so what did China do? Yes, they went and copied. But what they did was they copied to perfection by trying and trying and trying and making it better and making it better and making it better. But they've also spent a lot of money on education. They've got a massive workforce, and they decided we are going to take education, make this the key pillar of our country going forward. They educated people properly, and now they've got more than ample qualified and competent engineers to manufacture parts to the highest quality at the most competitive price. Second, then came India, and they said, okay, well, we're following this. So, I mean, you're sitting with two large countries with a massive population, and they are producing good parts, good quality parts that gets exported to Europe, to the US, well, to Africa. But we're sitting with all the resources.
Let me just add to this, because I think one of the challenges we have, to your point about mindset, is that what we've tended to do in Africans is produce a citizenry of work that wants to wear a suit and not an overall. No. And so manufacturing spaces just don't give the allure, to younger people that say, come and work here, right? Technical skills and, going to work and getting your hands oiled, right? And not beautifully manicured like Mine are. That's a separate point. But all of that, I think, creates a particular mindset that even long before you think about attracting this talent, you now sit with this issue. But in addition to this, if you look at both again, India and China, they use their own state capital to back those industries. So by the time international capital came on the table, they were backing themselves. And you made the point about they copied. They copied to perfection. They were fast followers, is what we'd call it in innovation, right? So they understood that first of its kind Hyundai or a Chery or a Haval wasn't going to be competitive with its counterpart Japanese or counterpart American. So they didn't evaluate on whether or not it's going to be competitive against those. They simply evaluated on can it achieve a sufficient market size that it's a buildable business case. And if we've got a buildable business case, then we will continue to iterate on the product and the product gets better. Now, if you look at some of their products, particularly the thing about Tatenda's industry, in the automotive sector, they're as near as makes no difference, identical to what you're seeing from the German companies, right, who are some 100 years old, say. And so you have to think about a country that's been able to create an industry, spawn an industry in a highly competitive, some might even argue, saturated market with very specific consumer trends, and in 30 years, catch up to the most advanced country in the world. That doesn't happen without intentionality.
So basically, in a nutshell, skills is actually the core problem. Yeah.
I think skills it's a complex issue, but you're right. Skills is one. Skills is one. I'm a capital guy. I will continue to tell you, you can have all the skills in the world that you want. You can have all the regulation in the world that you want. If you don't have patient capital, it's just not going to happen, right? So, I haven't seen Tatenda's cap table, but I'm willing to bet. Nobody's given him, 30-year capital that's lazy, sitting on his balance sheet and said, pay me in 30 years' time. That's just not how we provide capital here. It's not how we do business. Now, he's in automotive. If I think about in your business, for instance, even in the steel business, I'm willing to bet nobody is doing that. And so I think the fundamental question for African countries to ask themselves and for African governments to ask themselves is beyond the platitude of saying, we want manufacturing to create jobs.
Yeah.
What are you actually doing?
Yeah.
Right.
So, Vusi, just to take it from you there, first of all, I might need a change of clothing. I hear overalls are the thing that you need to be wearing. He says it's not attractive. I'm
wearing mine,
misrepresenting.
sorry.
I was told you were going to be in one. I thought I'd be the suit
All right,
guy.
yeah. But interestingly, the capital conversation, the skills conversation can be had more broadly, more directly linked to the resources. So one of the things that I do, I'm a consultant for the Africa Union in the African Mineral Vision that they have. So since 2008, this country came up with an idea in the plan. How do we use resources on the continent to industrialize the continent? They call it resource-based industrialization. And most of the things that Vusi and Steve have just mentioned are in there. So it's not like there's no blueprint in Africa. The blueprint is there. And I always say to them, the problem is when we speak of these things, we're in a closed room. We don't post about it. We don't say anything about it. We just develop it, read it, shelve it. So that's a culture now that we have as a continent. Vusi says we can mirror India, we can mirror China, right? I will put Dubai in the mix. I'll put Saudi Arabia in the mix, right? These are continents that saw a problem, did something about it on paper, and implemented. The implementation stage takes a lot of willpower, both at a government level, at a private industry level, obviously at a capital level. So if I approach a bank today and say, I have got this design, my own IP that I've designed, I want to make it into a vehicle and then sell it into this market. The conversation will take me 5 years. Why? They want paperwork. Manufacturing is not a paperwork industry. Steve would know that. The paperwork comes after the fact. So the culture we have of integrating the plan, the capital, the human resources, the mineral resources, it's all hinged on how we communicate. So we have a communication problem. One guy in DRC wants the same thing that is being made in South Africa. They can't access it. Logistics is another issue, right? And that's maybe what Vusi was touching on, that those dynamics really hinder progress on this continent. You can scream on the top of your voice. Those in your immediate vicinity might hear you, but some will ignore. If you want to go beyond that, it becomes equally harder. Recently, there was a video circulating of a case study in Nigeria. Another company that's manufacturing cars, or companies that are manufacturing cars there, people are saying, why are they not buying them? And there was a warehouse full of cars dusted, but people are buying expensive other brands. Let me not be direct. And you would ask yourself, what drives someone to buy the other brand instead of a African-made vehicle, you know? Because there's no sense of ownership. And my landing point is the only way you can have ownership in something is if you brand it correctly, if you name it correctly, and if you develop it yourself. So that whole integration, that whole different parts moving in different circles. Vusi is moving in his circle, I'm moving in my circle, Steve is moving in his circle. We need each other, but when we come to the table and communicate, it's a closed door session, something happens, something needs to happen, but for it to then be adopted by those outside of the room, that's one of the biggest challenges.
Now, another conversation, Steve, that me and you had, a bit earlier on, it was more about waste, which is a problem in let's see, different environments in Africa in general. So, can you discuss the current impact of plastic waste on the environment in African countries?
So just a FYI, South Africa is on a 43% recycling rate. That means that for every plastic bottle that gets manufactured, 43% of it gets recycled. But for the rest of Africa, there's no recycling facilities per se. So Coca-Cola likes to bring in bottles and bottles and bottles of Coke because everybody loves Coke. And we see it in the rural areas, we see it in town settlements and things like that, where plastic is a major issue. If you drive from here to Cape Town, you're going to go past Bloemfontein, and then just past Bloemfontein, there's a small little dorpie out there. I can't remember the name quite. But when you drive past there, it is literally plastic everywhere. And that is a problem. And I think that we're not isolated to that as an African continent. We're talking about a global problem, because we are creating far more plastic than what is necessary. But in that same breath, there is solutions to this. And I think on the African continent, there is so much potential for taking all these plastics that we're receiving, from buying a Coke, buying a Fanta, buying a Sprite, buying whatever, Butro, okay? All these plastics needs to be recycled. And we see it in Joburg quite a lot. There's a lot of guys walking around with their trolleys. You'll be irritated on the road, with this oak with his little pallet trolley that he made himself, and he went to Checkers and he stole most probably 4 wheels off, and he made a plan so that he can carry this 30-kilogram bag full of plastic, because that's on average the weight that they're carrying. And that is to receive R1.20 per kilo.
But then is the manufacturing sector then doing enough to assist the recycling world?
Well, I think that's the conversation that we must most probably start looking into.
What manufacturers, I think, can do in their domains, they should manage that waste that's within their area and actually assimilate it into their production line. One global OEM in the automotive sector, they recycle pretty much 70% of everything they use. So even if you bring their old product, they recycle it and put it back into the production line, the water, whatever. So in terms of plastic, in terms of steel, in terms of other, let's say, components that are fabricated, all of them can be recycled. You can repurpose them. You can make old furniture, or you can make new furniture from old plastic, for example. We are venturing into the composites because of that. So if you shred a plastic, mix it up with a couple of plants, you can actually create some very solid materials that are cost effective, number one. It's actually cheaper. This is why China buys a lot of waste from Africa. If you go to countries like Zambia, Mozambique, they're dumping their waste to China. And I was wondering, why is China buying all our waste? All the steel, it's usable, because you can put it into a blast furnace, mix it up with new steel so that you don't extract as much steel as, So All of these things the manufacturing companies are aware of. You know, any business plan or business case has that built in there.
So, so here's the thing, and I'm gonna pass it to you, Vusi. So, I recently had a conversation about this at one of the board games, based on the local communities complaining about, plastic boards are popping up everywhere, and it's building a lot of squatter camps. Then this person said to me, it is exposing us to the international market that there's poverty in Africa in general. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're trying to come up with a solution, but yet we're trying to push them away.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know that we need exposure to poverty. I think we know it's there. I mean, it's kind of the spatial planning of South Africa is such that you can ignore poverty, right? You can live in certain parts of your city, of your suburb, and just never have to interact with poor people at all. But what's pretty clear, right, is one by design, but also just by default, just very poor enforcement of bylaws, very poor planning. You're finding a lot of these squatter camps sprawling out into areas, which are not zoned for living. So let's not even make this a political conversation about whether or not poorer peoples have the right to claim land and live in certain areas. We can take that as a sidebar discussion. But there is a broader safety conversation, which is, are these areas zoned for living, right? Because there are several other things that come with that. So for instance, the Yexke here in Gauteng, in many different parts of the Yexke, you've got informal settlements that have been built around that. And you have to ask yourself the question, what happens if it floods? What happens if, and what happens to people's lives then? So I think we can't be flippant about the discussion. I think it requires a lot more intentional planning. But I do want to say something which I think is important here. Listen, this year alone, I've traveled 19 countries. I'll do 50 countries before the end of the year. Our firm is in 3 different continents. So I'm going to tell you something now as a statement of fact. It's not an opinion. Africa, broadly, and South Africa specifically, has a problem of misaligned incentives. And we don't understand that society functions on incentives. If you create incentives, people will behave in a particular way. That's the reason why you stop when the traffic light is red. Because if you don't, there is an incentive that you place yourself in danger, but also that in infringing the law enforcement will take its place. Do you understand? So when you want to design society to do something, what I'd be fascinated to hear from any of these people, whether it's at a local level, provincial level, municipal level, or even at a state level, is what systems of incentives are you putting in place? So what we must be careful to do is not to deal with the outcome, but deal with the system that creates the outcome, right? So you've got, to your point, you've got this sprawling industry of plastics all over the place. And I echo what you were saying, right? You're driving down, I don't know, Winnie Mandela Lane, and there's just, and what you have to understand is those citizens work that way because there's a system of incentives. I collect, I drop off, I get paid. Now, in a country with, as near as makes no difference, 50% unemployment, what is it you expect me to do exactly, right? So I think what we have to do is to be sensitive to the society we're in, the time we're in. And actually the broader, thing is to, if I'm watching this and I'm somebody who sits in a state functionary, the question I would be asking is, how do I design incentives so that these are not the issues you're facing? I can tell you this, to what Tatenda was saying, is quite right, that there is a large industry that extracts waste and sends it to other parts of the world, in particular the East. Right. What he didn't mention, and I'm sure he knows it, is it's not like they just extract it and send it there in private capital. Those governments have a system of incentives. So they incentivize companies to bring the waste in because they understand that it lowers their production cost on the next unit of product that they want to make. Yeah. So now you must ask the question, so where are our incentives, right? And without the incentives, then the system exists the way that it exists.
Which actually opens doors to opportunities.
So just for interest's sake, what do you think, if we look at PET, so that's Coke bottles, what do you think these guys with the trolleys get per kilo?
I really don't know. I couldn't say.
Not much. I would say not much.
I will share an experience. It's a true story, right? So to all my haters in social media, this is actually a true story. I think I must have been like 8 or 9 years old. I come not too far from where we are now. I come from a small township called Wattville. And my friends and I had it in our heads that we were going to go collecting, waste, and we're going to go dump it on one of these waste places, and they were going to pay us. It's a true story. We walked around the entire day, Tatenda, like the whole day. I was Trevor Noah's complexion until that day. The whole day in the sun, walking around, collecting all these plastics, putting them in things. And then we eventually went to this place. If you know, when you're coming out of sort of Wattville towards Actonville, there's an industrial area on the side. So we went to this place and we went and gave them all these waste. Now, on the way, we had planned what we were going to do with the money. Right? This is, I see a lot of entrepreneurs do this. They build an Excel spreadsheet about the business plan and then they go, I'm a millionaire. No, the Excel spreadsheet is a millionaire. Anyway, so we'd planned, I was like, I'm going to take my 10 Rand and I'm going to buy this. And the person's like, I'm going to buy an AK-47. This one's like, I'm going to buy this. My guy, we get to this place and we dump all of this waste in them. And it's like 15 of us. Yeah. They gave us 2 Rand 50. That was my first lesson in capitalism. I will never forget that experience. So I mentioned that only to say, albeit that was probably 30 years ago, I can't imagine that the unit economics are much more than that.
So it's 1 Rand 20, 1 Rand 20 a kilo.
It's extraordinary.
So
and that's a kilo of weight, right?
A kilogram. Have you try and
get? And you got to think about how much plastic is worth a kilo. Yeah, I get it.
That's why that thing is so big.
Yeah.
And then those bottles, what they do is they open the caps off and they suck them to compress them. And then they close it. Okay, so that they can get more volume in their bag.
Sure.
To get more weight.
Sure.
Okay, so people that...
And is it safe to suck a bottle you just picked up?
No.
Sure.
But if you are fighting for survival, so let's just bring it back to reality. If I had no job and I had children to feed and a wife,
I'm with you. Sir.
I will do what I need to do.
I'm with you.
Those people are more... what's the right word? They've got more integrity than somebody planning a cash and transit heist.
Sure. No, that's
okay.
Good.
They've got integrity built in them because they would rather go and pick up bottles and make sure the surroundings are clear. And yes, they open bags and they take it out and most probably frustrate a whole lot of people and they're always in the roads. But they've got more integrity than many other South African people that are pointing fingers at them.
By the way, that's a good business for you to tender. If they have to suck it.
Yeah,
like
a vacuum. We design a vacuum pump for them to. So, Steve, sorry to interject, but I just had an epiphany based on something we are researching. Right, recycling. We are talking of recycling what's on the continent, and Vusi's story made me realize that the problem is actually worse for us as Africa. So we have, on one hand, small materials being recycled, being bought out of Africa to the east. But we have an even bigger problem. We buy what they are supposed to be recycling and make it our main mode of transportation.
That's it.
So nature does not allow a vacuum. What does that tell us? About 0.01% of what's produced or what's required in terms of transportation on this continent is what we manufacture. Mm-hmm. Go to all the manufacturing plants that you see across the continent and you say they're producing volumes. Only 0.01% end up being a solution for Africa. On a continent of 1 billion people. The rest, we are buying waste and we are spending real capital, US dollars. There's an outflow problem. So at an economic level, we need to manage the waste conversation responsibly. And I think to your point, as manufacturers, we need to wake up and say, listen, there's something wrong here. We need to address this as an opportunity, right? The waste conversation, I'll gladly tell you that you can lower your production cost by as much as 40%. And that's huge in the manufacturing space. As much as 40%. Steve, you're into steel. If we go around Brakpan and start picking up the scrap metal.
All scrap metal, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're going to find a lot of
and put it into a blast furnace somewhere and check it into your workflow, you realize that your costs generally are less.
You're saving.
You see? So I think we need to have that conversation. But from my sector, I think the inflow of grey imports, as they are called, go beyond the borders of South Africa, because this is the only country where there's really active or proactive incentive to stop that, because there's like 10 manufacturers, we being the 11. You don't find that anywhere. Other industries are dead because people. I'm not proud of this, but most governments, one of their top expenditure items is vehicles, imported vehicles. So that cycle needs to stop.
Yeah, so funnily enough, I went to Togo not too long ago. Well, actually Liberia, and
Freetown.
no, I went to
That's Sierra Leone,
to Buchanan, but I just did the stopover at Togo. So I walk out the airport, and here's all these black cars, brand new Range Rovers, and at the back of the Range Rovers were Land Cruisers. Okay, so those are very expensive cars, all brand new, and all just waiting there for somebody to from government or whatever to hop into them and to go off. And I'm thinking to myself, Togo of all places is sitting with like what I could only imagine in a rand value. We were looking at like close to 30 million rands worth of cars standing there, all for politicians. But that's just a topic for another day. But the point that I was trying to make with the plastic, if we have to buy virgin material plastic from Sasol or imported from China, whatever.
When you say virgin, you mean like
Raw.
Oh, right.
Raw material.
Right.
So brand. So look, it comes in pallets.
Right.
Okay, plastic.
Right.
When they manufacture it, it goes through a process and then they palletize it.
Gotcha.
So that the density of the pellet and the size, that determines quite a lot on the injection molding of molding that specific product.
I'm with you.
Okay, so if you have to buy base material, you're looking at about anything between 35 Rand up to 150 Rand a kilo for new material. So the guy picking up the bottle gets 1 Rand 20. Then it gets recycled, and the value chain in between, that is where we need to wake up.
Yeah.
Okay. You were talking about incentives. If we had to give the guy that picks up the plastic bottle 5 Rand a kilo, and we're looking at the end game of what virgin material costs, I mean, there's enough margin there to make up a lot.
Sure.
Okay. So I know this is not part of the script and everything, but Leah, quickly go for me to preciousplastics.com.
But then back to script, are there companies that you know of that have capitalized on these kind of
There are certain
opportunities?
companies, but it's very few and far between. So you've got big recycling houses, like there's a few in Wadeville. There's a few in Durban, Pinetown area. Same in Cape Town, but I'm talking about a few. And all their business is basically they're taking a product, they're recycling it, and they're selling it for 15 Rand a kilo as a regrind or something like that to injection molding companies. But it is then specified as a regrind, and they only use it for certain parts and things like that. So preciousplastics.com, they started a few years ago, and this is all open source. And I looked at this and I thought, wow, what a great initiative. So they just wanted to basically get a bunch of plastic off the face of the earth and make it parts for consumer use, everyday parts.
Nice.
Okay, so in this, they teach you how to recycle. They teach you how to build your own machines.
Nice.
And all the YouTube tutorials and videos and everything is already there.
Nice.
But now coming to the African space, people don't have infrastructure for that. And this is, I think, where we could.
Is this not where the incentives Vusi is talking about come in?
This is where incentives come
Where
in.
like a municipality, a government, or
That's
anyone in a position to really address the infrastructure problem can step up and say, I mean, I know places where there are defunct buildings, where
100%.
you can repurpose those, you
100%.
can recycle the building.
We're not too far from them here. Entire Eguru Lane is full of defunct buildings. The industrial hub of the eastern part of Joburg has been completely decimated. It's decimated. And to your point, you've got to ask yourself the question. This is, I think one of the things people forget, Tatenda, is that South Africa, the economy of South Africa was built out of mineral industrial complex. So when I was growing up, separating Wattville and Actonville was a railway. That railway, twice a day, every day, had a train coming full of cargo, right? And then twice a day, every day, had a train with pedestrians. So 4 times a day, the rail's going either side. Right. Today, the railway's not there. I want to be clear. Not the trains are not there.
The railway.
The railway's not there.
Or they took it as well.
I think it takes a special level of Hulk strength to remove railway. Do you understand? But the real question, Tatenda, is this. How have you allowed the infrastructure of logistics to be removed from the system? Because what happens when you go and raise money, say you want to go and talk to a DFI, for instance, say, I'm going to go put my factory in X part of the country because there I can get, access to good labor, I can do training, et cetera, et cetera. That's the next question they're going to ask you. And how are you going to get your goods to market? Now you, as a business owner, private enterprise entrepreneur, need to start thinking around things like state logistics, which is the responsibility of the state. And I mentioned this to your point about plastics, right? And to your point about even what a company like Precious Plastics is doing is that the great thing about where the state fails is you'll find entrepreneurs who will innovate out of it. Because they're just like, we can't live like this. This can't continue like this. So when I see, I don't know if you've ever been to any of these, kind of building stores. I won't mention any names, but there's typically somebody there who stood with a sign that says carpenter, tiler. For me, that's not a failure. That is the natural, dynamic free market doing its job. It's somebody who goes, I recognize you've just bought something and you're going to need to install that thing and you probably don't know how to, and there's no marketplace where you can get that. So I'm going to make myself available for you to do that. That and the person who's collecting waste, and you can just keep going down the pike. Those are the same categories of work, right? And all of those categories of work are incredibly labor intensive. And I think what we need to do is to stop demonizing and rather say, how do you assimilate these categories of work into the formal economy? How do you create incentives so that entrepreneurs can bring these people into their companies so that we can get these people into the formal chain of work? Until that's done, you're going to continue to have this, formal versus informal economy with a massive gray area in the middle. And that gray area in the middle is actually a security concern for the whole country.
Now, you mentioned something very important about earlier on. You did say, everyone goes on about jobs.
Yes.
But where are the jobs and what kind of jobs are out there?
Yes.
Now, within the industry itself, the manufacturing sector, let's look at the trends. What kind of jobs are out there?
Can I make a point? I know you want to answer this. I want to say something. First, to every single citizen watching this, there is no such thing as job creation. It doesn't exist. There's value creation. So anytime you hear any person in power say, I'm going to create jobs, they're lying. Nobody creates jobs. What they do is they create a system of incentives that allows market players to create industries which need jobs. That's the way that works, right? And then until the day an actual person in public office can themselves go and become an industry player, you can't create jobs. It does not exist. Nowhere in the world has that been done. So when you look at countries like China and India, Vietnam, you look at even regions like Kuala Lumpur, Dubai you mentioned earlier, look at the entire GCC, Dubai, Oman, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, I could just keep going. What those regions have understood is create value, and of the value, industry players will come and jobs will be created. So we have to be very specific about this, because even in South Africa, you have companies that say they're in manufacturing that are actually just assembly. They're not in manufacturing.
They're not in manufacturing.
Right? So now you got to go, okay, so wait a minute. Why did you get that manufacturing grant from that department when all you're doing is you're taking part from there, part from there, part from there. They all land at Richards Bay. You put them into your little cart, you bring them into your shop, you assemble them, and then you tell us made in. That surely isn't right? And I don't want to mention any names, but I think we all know who I'm talking about. And if I am the person heading up the country, the first thing I would be wanting to do is to go, how do I protect my manufacturing industry from an assembly industry that pretends to manufacture? Because the labor absorption rates of these are very, very different.
Totally.
Right? If you're assembling, you're importing components That's a very different business to a company that requires the actual manufacture of product, which means there's an entire value chain, there's an extraction of raw materials, there's a lot of IP that sits in that. Just that alone, those three are mega industries, long before you get to the actual making of the Parker pen or the HB pencil or whatever the case might be.
So just touching on a topic you spoke about this building retailer, and I wanted to start a series, a vlog series, same as what we basically doing a few years ago, called Hey Mr. Big Retailer. Because you go there and go buy a bath plug, okay, packaged in South Africa, manufactured in China.
Sure.
Okay, go buy a plumbing fitting. Go buy anything there and see what is manufactured in South Africa. Zero. So we're sitting with engineering companies. I get quite a lot of phone calls on a monthly basis. Listen, do you want? Can you perhaps come and see me? I'd like to sell my business. Things are going bad. I've got machines. I just want to sell my machines just so that I can look after myself and get out of this industry. I get a lot of those phone calls on quite a regular basis. And I'm thinking to myself, here we've got people with skill sets, but they don't have enough work to run their machines.
Yeah.
But there is big retailing companies that's moving a lot of stock, but they won't support South African manufacturing. Why? Because the government has given imports an incentive. Because now all of a sudden, the tax directives on those imported products isn't high enough. But yet you want to increase the tax, the personal tax on the people that work here.
And don't forget, to your point about the imports, and I'm being rude and interrupting you, but I want to add to what you're saying. To your point about these imports that arrive here, I think what's important for people watching this to understand is it's not just that we're complaining that the world is globalizing. The world can globalize all at once. I believe in the global agenda, right? And don't misquote me on this. But it must be fair. So what's actually happening is the company that makes the components in the country where they make the components has a government with a system of incentives that makes it soft and easy for them to make those components, to ship them, and to bring them to our ports. So by the time they arrive at our port, even if you were the most efficient player in the market, you can't compete with them because they've been given a softer landing by their government.
Of course.
And then in our environment, not only is there no softer landing, or very little, if any to speak of, but there's also a very hostile capital environment. So when you go to seek for capital, you can't get it. When you do, it's incredibly expensive. And all of a sudden, you're finding yourself having to compete in this. So I think it's important for people to understand that it's not just that we're moaning about the globalization. Globalization is happening everywhere.
And it's going to happen.
Long may it continue.
Yeah.
But what I think is the responsibility of governments is to ensure that when you have a national strategic agenda, you set aside a system of incentives that protects that agenda.
But then during the mask season, I won't call it COVID. During the mask season, where we're all ninjas, it was all about, let's buy local, support local, do this for the local people. The question is, do we have as South Africa, I'm bringing it back home, do we have enough resources? Is the machinery right that we can produce local? And
so on that topic, I mean, COVID hit, and I'd never forget it. It was on the 23rd, I got wind that by the 28th, our country's going to be in a total lockdown. And I thought to myself, how am I going to tell my staff that, guys, this is uncertain times and I don't know how we are going to firstly pay you your salaries and how is people going to get by? And I sat at my house and I'm just the type of person, I took my garage, I moved everything out of my garage, and I had 3D printers set up there, and I started printing those little face shields. I did that for a day, and my wife was like, listen, you're right there just printing these things. The rest of the family's in the house. Like, can you? And we started a group with 3D printing, and people were 3D printing these little headbands with the transparencies. And I got in my car, came to his office, designed a mold, put it on a machine. 3 days later, we were pushing out 1,000 units a day. 1,000 units a day of those face shields. Throughout COVID, we manufactured 1 million face shields.
Wow.
Okay? And that is, if it wasn't for agility and that specific solution of manufacturing it locally, I would have had to let my staff go. But in that period, when the restrictions were let down, we employed 400 people. 400 people in this workshop, all from Reiger Park, because that was the closest area to come for packaging.
So Steve, if I were to jump in there with a bit of a broader perspective to what you've just said, manufacturing in Africa is a survival
It is.
business, you know, because COVID was a wake-up call for almost everyone. But if you're in the manufacturing space, you know, and your value chain is either imports or people coming physically to work, you don't understand things like the COVID pandemic, how it hit. And it hit us very, very, very hard, because at the time we were the technical partner that was halfway across the world. And we thought, okay, we are now going for the kill. We wanted to launch a fleet of 100 cars. So we were excited. And then I think it was the 26th of March, we were in lockdown. Like, okay, what do we do now? You know, ships are not moving, things are not moving. That's when we switched to electric vehicle. And that's where I realized that, okay, this manufacturing space in Africa is import driven. And if you don't adapt to certain fundamentals, your business just dies. This is the reason why we have empty shells in all across Africa. Let me not just say in South Africa. Across Africa, they were built to support manufacturing off the shores of Africa. Then they were left when manufacturing moved to other parts of the world. In the automotive industry specifically, the reason why China has leapfrogged a lot of the mainstream brands is they just realized, okay, the secret is not the factory per se. The secret is the supply chain. So let's take everyone's IP, let's take the value chain and move it to China. And how do they incentivize it? We'll do it cheaper. How? They counted heads, like, here, how many people do we have? X number of billions. Okay. So if we spread the cost of manufacturing versus the number of people, we'll do it right. That's leadership that came into play. So when you see it from a mile out, the factory becomes the victim. You know, now Germany is in panic. The US is in panic. They're like, okay, we don't know what happened, because I can bet you everyone here using their phone, it came from China, no matter what brand is there. Might have been designed somewhere else, manufactured in China, because they just got good at building the thing. And they got good at sourcing the resource. They came to Africa. Most of these countries in Africa that are mineral rich, the mining equipment used there is Chinese. We used to see these yellow plant equipment. It was coming from other parts of the world. Now go and check which one is coming from other parts of the world. It's Chinese. They have taken over the critical value chains. And what Vusi was saying, the logistics. Plugged out rail, went on the road, now there's congestion. But who supplies you the cars that are pulling those things?
So if it's just interesting on that, I mean, if you travel down, if you travel from Bella to Joburg, okay, you will see copper trucks. So a lot of copper traveling, and then also down to Durban and to Richards Bay and things like that. So all that copper is raw copper going out of the country to China. It gets reworked there, and then gets sent all the way back. So we are paying for
the logistics,
our roads that's being ripped up, and then obviously it goes by ship. So if we can keep our own resources. So I don't know if you're obviously familiar with rugby, with the game of rugby. Sure. Okay, so the Blue Bulls is a specific pattern.
The greatest team in the history of the sport.
Say it loud and clear, man. I'm listening now. Say it loud and clear.
The Blue Bulls has got a specific game plan. And if the opponent doesn't have the ball, the opponent cannot score a try.
That's right.
So what do?
Keep possession.
We take the ball, we make the ball going to a maul or going into a scrum, pass the ball, run it again, run it again, phase after phase after phase, and every time they're moving 3 meters forward. Yes, it's high intensity. It takes a lot of effort. But once they've pulled the team into a corner and the ball gets put out to the back line quickly, the wing goes and scores a try. The Springboks does exactly the same thing.
Would you then say, now what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of unity, there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of teamwork. Is the problem then in Africa that companies are not working together?
So what I'm saying is we sitting with all the resources. If we don't share our resources to the extent that we're sharing it, but we are create an infrastructure where we can process our own resources and manufacture it here. We can manufacture it cheaper because you are taking transportation away. The whole cost of time. So a ship from Durban to China, 6 weeks. Here to Dubai, 4 weeks. Okay? So it's 6 weeks there and another 6 weeks back. It's 12 weeks out of a 52-week year that something is traveling from here to there. So you can manufacture at a far higher rate if we've got the skill set and if we've got the infrastructure.
But gentlemen, would you say then, what I'm picking up is that I feel like collaboration is kind of a problem.
Is the key. So can I give you a simple equation?
Yeah.
So last week I was presenting for I think it's called Global Witness. They're a non-profit organization based out in Kenya, and they asked me to speak on something similar. What do we do with this problem in Africa? And I gave a simple equation. P plus R plus D is equals to industrialization. Right? It stems from what he's saying. What is P? People. We have people, different skill sets. He's into producing steel or any other things that he can. Probably I come with a different discipline. Vusi comes with a different discipline. That's all part of the resource equation, right? The people, the skill set they have. Then R is the actual mineral resources we have. Right in this area, I think we've got 3-4 mines that are extracting something, which ends up in production somewhere. And then the one that I think people ignore, but is critical, is the design part, the intellectual property. If you know anything about any product that we use, the furniture we sit on, the houses, there's a design element. So if you can design something like a building, there's nice buildings there in Sandton. Most likely it's an African designer or architect, let's call them an architect, because people think that it's a different discipline. It's just design. And it's IP that's predominantly in Africa, right? And you can spend so much money to construct that beautiful office tower in Sandton, but you neglect applying the same principle when you want to manufacture a product that's mass produced. I think you begin to miss what's critical about this whole collaboration. The design is the glue, because that's where the intellectual property sits. That's where you can determine a value chain. Currently, we are doing a supply development for our manufacturing, and we get a lot of inquiries from China and somewhere further afield. Experienced companies, they know what they're doing. And they come to us and say, send us your design. Bonyi will tell you, I always say no. Yeah. Because I know that's the thing that makes us unique. That's our unique selling point. The moment you want me to send you my design, that's a deal breaker for me. I would rather ask you to come and set up here and participate with us here on our design. And that is what I think needs to be the thinking in the manufacturing space in Africa. We don't need to look at it from, where can I do it cheaper? Of course, it's going to be expensive when you start. Of course, it's going to be difficult to set up any type of operation. But if you are deliberate enough, 5 years down the line, you start to see some of the benefits. I've resigned to the fact that, okay, what we have started, we may not be the ones to perfect it, but let's perfect the foundation. Let's build a supply chain in Africa for automotive. If someone can make a chair, they can make a seat in a car. If someone can make a plastic dish, they can make a dashboard. If someone can make X, Y, and Z, they can do this. It's just a matter of teaching them what you've designed, allowing them to fail 10 times. So I'll tell them, it's okay, fail fast. Just don't do it too slow. Fail very quickly because we need it. So those are the things I think as people we need to speak about. The resources are there, the designs are there. That's what leads to purposeful manufacturing and development. And that can be duplicated across the continent. He spoke of some of the countries in Central Africa. They've got no access to tooling. I was in DRC the other time, and they use some very rudimentary tools to do complex things like to move across the Kivu region, which is I think in the eastern part bordering with, it takes 7 days, if not 40 days in a rainy season to
depending on
move
rain.
a 20-kilometer distance. And I asked myself, why? It's a very short distance, but there's no road. The guys have created, they cut down trees because it's rainforest. They cut down trees, make some rudimentary bridges, which they remove if they don't like your car and they say, pay us a fine or pay something. Then they work throughout the night. And I'm like, but there's a simpler way of doing this. If there's a designer involved, they can solve this problem, right? And they can own the solution to that problem. And look at how big DRC is in terms of landmass. So those are challenges that I think we need to speak of when we're on a platform like this. Talking of manufacturing, we don't need to look at manufacturing from the cool, fancy gadgets that come from halfway across the world. We need to look at what problems do we have here? What do we need? Who can develop it? He spoke about COVID. People needed face shields. I didn't hear him saying he imported the face shields. He said, we designed it here, we made it here. And 400 jobs were created, not created. Value was created, and then 400 jobs were a result of that.
There you go. You nailed it.
So that's kind of the dynamic we need to look at when we're sitting on this platform. Any industry, this can happen. Any industry, this can happen.
Now, I'm going to wrap it up with you guys very soon. I like, the fact that you're focused on the people. MCAT does this a lot, where you go out and you find youth and you bring them in and you give them skills. Are companies doing enough? Are we doing enough for the youth?
So there is one of our clients that does quite a bit. Company name is Kenna Metal. So they send 15 people per year as well for training. And this obviously helps their BEE scorecard because they are spending their money on skills development. We train those guys. They, after 4 years, they qualified. Then they go back to them and they then continue as reps, sales reps in the manufacturing market, selling carbide tooling, things like that, or go on to other companies in the manufacturing space. But there is a big chunk of companies that doesn't understand that they can have a tax directive, like a tax rebate on upskilling people. If you are contributing towards somebody's education that is unemployed, there's a tax rebate. And companies aren't using that.
Exactly.
They see it as a grudge purchase. It's like, why must I pay for training? This person should be qualified already. Why should I pay for his training? But then those same companies that complains about that, they phone us. And I mean, this happens like on a daily basis. Hey, Steve, you guys do CNC training. Yeah. Do you have anybody for me? No, because somebody else paid for the people that I'm busy training. So unfortunately, I do not have somebody. So the market expects other people to pay for their benefit, which I think is wrong. I think companies should man up. If you've got a skills gap within your company, we're here to provide the solution, and there's a tax write-off for that. Start investing in your own company's future by sending your people for the right training.
Sure.
So I mean, it makes logical sense to me. So that's why I did it. In 2018, I said I'm going to, because we were running lean in here, like very lean, and I was working myself to the bone because I did most of the machining myself. I had a team of 4 or 5 guys, and we were working 24/7. This with the Gabella projects and the Transnet deals back in 2013, 15, 16.
You're the ones that made those trains that don't fit.
No. Those are the imported ones from Brazil, isn't it?
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. No. So actually, at that point in time, we were manufacturing parts for GE and for Bombardier.
Right.
And we failed in many of those parts because quality was an issue,
Sure.
because of a lack of knowledge, a lack of skill set. And I decided, because at the end of the day, I had to do all the machining myself. My wife opened the cupboard the one day just to check if my clothes are still there. My daughter was asking my wife, listen, is Daddy ever coming home? Because I worked around the clock 7 days a week. I went home on a Wednesday, quickly shower, then get in my car, come to work. And I'll go home for Sunday lunch just to refresh. And I did that for 4 or 5 months.
Sure.
And then I got tired and we failed, and that's fine. I made a failure because I couldn't sustain the pressure of being a robot, because I'm not a robot, I'm a human. And there I made the decision to say, okay, well, seems that there's this skills gap and this inadequacy of skill level. Let me share my knowledge with people. And I decided to go into schools and go and find kids in schools, not at varsity level, not at college level, not people that has already worked for somebody else before. Because if they have worked for somebody else before, they've already learned somebody else's bad manners and bad habits. And we've put together a bunch of teams throughout the last 5 years in training people in the right way. And that adds value to my business. And if all companies has the same perspective of, you know what, let me educate my people so that they can add value to me. Today, I don't have to stand behind machines anymore because I have taught the right team in order to do that.
All right, I believe you've heard it all. It is time to shut it down right here in the Cam studios. Gentlemen, closing remarks based on the conversations you guys had today. What would you say is a realistic and ideal solution we could implement vandaag soos nou as soon as we walk out of here? Tatenda, we'll start with you.
All right. Thanks so much. My parting shot is, let's simplify this manufacturing space. Let's demystify some of the proverbial boogeyman situations that exist. Vusi touched on capital. We need to unpack that in the context of manufacturing. What meaningful conversations can be had private sector and public sector, and obviously the broader financing economy, and to the manufacturers. I believe we have reached a transition period, where instead of us thinking who does it cheaper outside of the continent, maybe let's give Steve a call. And I've met a fair share of brilliant young minds who have got brilliant concepts. What most people do, they inbox me and give suggestions, thoughts, and some of the projects they're working on. Brilliant talent that's on this continent. Let's try and captivate and harness that into some of our work streams. These are things that I don't think cost money, because everyone looks at Vusi in the VC space and say, Vusi, give us money. We need to do this. Some of the things you just need to think and you need to act, and you need to be a person. You need to speak to someone with technology that's there nowadays, social media. You can reach people. I'm doing business with people in Senegal. I've never even met them, but they have read something that we are doing. It didn't cost us much, but they connected and we are doing business. So across the continent, I believe the solutions are there. Africans have got solutions for African problems. That's one thing I truly believe in. So it's just how we connect and implement. And I think if we level the playing field, I would go a step beyond just looking at governments and leadership to try and actively do something. I would say the bigger element in a country is the public, the general people. What conversations are we having at that level that we need to take to these guys? Because if you just point fingers at them and blame them, sometimes when you then come with a very good idea, they'll shut you down because they think you're already an enemy. So they've already built a wall. But you need to have a good rapport. That's one thing maybe some of the countries that are developing have. They might not like everything the leadership does, but they agree on certain fundamentals. And that's things, again, I say, will not cost us much money, just the sheer will to do so.
Vusi?
I would say 3 things. The first thing I would say is that the zero marginal cost economy is now here, right? What automation has done, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these things, is they have reduced the cost of production to as near as makes no difference zero on a marginal basis. If that is true, and it is, then there's absolutely no reason why the continent on a cost basis can't compete with other regions. Except there's the expression going around now in business schools. They say AI won't replace people. The person who knows how to use AI will replace people. And I think it's exactly the same in the world of machinery and robotics. It's not what the machine will do, it's what the person who knows how to use that machine will do. So I think the first thing to do is to modernize our teaching, modernize our curriculums, and make sure that we have a skills base that has the requisite level of skills with the technology of the day. For me, that's first point, kind of full stop, new paragraph. And to do that, one of the things you've got to make sure of is that these qualifying authorities and the accreditation authorities actually understand what is happening in industry, right? And there's an entire conversation there. The second conversation is that it's the role of government to do two things. Government sets the rules and monitors behavior. In other words, you pass policy and you create incentives. And I think the real question for all governments across the continent really to ask themselves is, have you taken intentional, deliberate steps to set the correct policy framework and to incentivize that behavior? You were talking about what's happening in the training space with the rebate you earn from CETAs, right? It's an incentive in the market. And you'd be silly as a business person to have an incentive that is an instrument of policy and not unlock it. Now, if we can do it in training, what else can you do if you were really intentional about what you wanted to do in this space? If you actually were intentional about wanting to re-industrialize, this expression they love using in Parliament, and I don't think they understand what that really and truly means. When you say re-industrialize, what does that actually mean? Right. And so what you find is they'll do mega projects and then they'll have what they call a local content component, right? But let's say, for instance, you're doing a mega project at ESCOM and a local contribution component is 40%. What you're looking at is whether or not the producer or the person giving you that service or product is local. What you're not asking is, where are they getting it? So if you were to actually do it onto a root kind of basis, you'd find that it's not the 40% that local contribution is supposed to be. So the point I make is, have the right regulation, have the necessary incentives. And then I think the third, which is something for the entire manufacturing industry really to think about, is the industry has to start speaking in a single voice. Think about it this way. Labor has unions, right? Business has leadership societies that pull it together, chambers of commerce, because there is a recognition in society that a voice that represents most of us is more powerful than a single voice. And so I think it's time opportune for the industry to really start thinking about, how do we speak as a single voice? How do we represent our agenda as a single voice, so that when laws, rules, policies are being put in place, when training materials are being passed, we are around the table. Tatenda said something, and I'll close with it. The return, and I know because I'm a finance person, I've actually done the calculation. The financial return for criticism is zero. There is never a time when criticism on the one end of the equation gives you a positive outcome on the other. All it does is it spurs up a little bit of discontent, it gets people talking, and then something might happen, right? But the return for criticism is zero. So if you want something positive to happen, you've got to move beyond criticism. You've got to move beyond pointing fingers. You've actually got to get yourself, that thing they say, Steve, what do they say? If you're not sitting around the table, you're on the menu. Yeah. So it really is about, make sure your voice is heard, make sure that you're well represented, and work together. I think for me, there's no competition. There's co-opetition. We've got to collaborate. We've got to work together. And the more we work together, that's why I accepted the opportunity to be here. I'm not necessarily in manufacturing, but I'm in capital markets. So I understand what's happening. And I go, if that industry grows, the country grows, the GDP grows, deal pipeline grows. And so I take it as my civic duty, my responsibility as a citizen to go, this is something that needs my voice.
Okay, Mack, so for me, for a wrap up, as your question was, what is a solution that we could find immediately? So obviously we know the skills gap is there, and it's not a skills gap, that's a lie, it's an education gap, okay? And you said it just now, manufacturing is almost people don't want to get their hands dirty, okay? So when I started dating my wife and I said to her, I'm an engineer, she's like, a mechanic. Like, there's a big difference, but yes, I'm behind machines and I manufacture parts and things like that. And we need to make manufacturing sexy. We need to create content that makes manufacturing sexy. Yeah. We want to move forward to make it look like it is a desirable occupation. Okay? So if we look at what the average going rate of a CNC machinist is, I'm talking about a CNC machinist, somebody that can design a part, program the machine, and manufacture that part all in one go. That's a CNC machinist. He's not a designer, he's not a programmer, he's not an operator. He does everything, the full supply chain of that said product. Those people earn, what is your guess per hour? Because they're all on wages.
I couldn't say. I don't have a reference point.
Oh, you're looking at me now.
No, so those people earn between 250 and 450 Rand an hour. It's not bad pay.
Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong.
And if you work overtime, so there's only 40 hours in a week, whatever goes over is overtime, which is 1.5, the times 1.5. So the salaries are there. The money is there to back it. You just need to be good at what you do. And I don't think people realize the potential for making a proper living in manufacturing, and that it's there. So we need to take that manufacturing and we need to make it sexy. Okay? So we spoke about the education thing. We spoke about the plastics. So here's a proposal. Why don't we take recycled plastic, and in our curriculum that we go forward, instead of teaching people how to do things and how to make parts by making paperweights, Leah, quickly go to that preciousplastics.com. Why don't we in our curriculum teach people how to manufacture those machines? Now we've got the value chain, we've got plastic. We're educating people on how to manufacture the machines, how to manufacture the tooling to actually make parts from this plastic. Okay? And then make the parts. But we need an offset for parts.
Got you.
Yeah.
So the automotive industry, will the automotive industry be able to support parts manufactured from recycled plastic to use in the vehicles? Because then you've got a 40% saving on cost.
That's a tough one.
Steve, you know, you've just probed a very critical issue, but because we have closed, I'm not going to respond, but allow me to just give this small interjection. Does the problem of having manufacturing leaders that don't originate from your country or continent? I'll leave that to your own interpretation, right? Adapting what you've said as a solution. It won't work if most of the critical decisions are made offshore.
Yes, totally right. Totally right. But is that a solution to solving both education and creating jobs?
Definitely. A practical solution.
And it's not something that only has to happen in South Africa. This can happen throughout the whole of Africa.
Yes.
So as AMP as a company, because we've got the distribution for SolidWorks and Mastercam throughout Africa, we're looking for partners. We're looking for company owners to say, I would like to be a part of AMP. They need to raise their hands and contact us and say, listen, we would like to become sub-resellers, and we share our knowledge with them, and this is a business opportunity for other people. And once we start this value chain of educating in how to manufacture these small recycling plants and how to manufacture an iPhone cover or anything like that, that's a whole new venture out for Africa. And I do think, me personally, I do believe that this is a plausible solution to making at least a difference in the African market by just sharing our knowledge and our vision with the rest of Africa.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to shut this down officially. You're more than welcome to leave your questions in the comment section below. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next AMP CAD-CAM broadcast. Cheers.